Welcome back to Previously Prohibited. I'm Jenin Eunice, here with my co-host Melissa Whitty, and we're joined today by Daniel McAdams, the director of the Ron Paul Institute and co-host of the Ron Paul Liberty Report. We're really excited to have him. He's extremely knowledgeable about foreign policy, libertarianism, and I think we're going to kick off with a discussion of the Dave Smith and Douglas Murry debate that took place on Joe Rogan. I think it was yesterday, at least it was released yesterday, and it seems to me the whole world is talking about it, at least in my Twitter sphere. So, but first, over to you, Mel.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for coming back. Thank you so much for your comments, especially I believe it was Shane who said that he watches with his wife. And so hi to you guys. He said your wife wasn't very political, but she enjoyed our show. So that was quite the compliment to both Jenin and I. And yeah, if you could hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and leave us a comment. And yes, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us. I was so excited when Jenin said that you were coming. And so why don't you tell us, how did you get hooked up with the Ron Paul Institute?
Well, I worked for Dr. Paul on the Hill as his senior aide for 13 years, I guess it was. I started right after 9/11 doing his foreign policy, intelligence, defense, civil liberties, and a few other things. And then I left when he retired in 2013, and that's the year we started the Ron Paul Institute. So the purpose of the Ron Paul Institute is to continue the work that he did in the House.
Nice.
So, what was it? No, I was going to say, okay, so this debate that everybody's talking about, I saw some of your commentary on Twitter, but what, in your own words here, I guess, what are your overall impressions?
Well, I mean, I think it's actually more significant than I thought at the time. My original sort of, I mean, I go to X to just sort of expel, right?
As we all do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so initially I just thought, I think I made a comment like, why didn't Dave just kick him in the groin and go home or something, But I actually think, I reflected on it a little bit more carefully. And I think it's sort of a debate of our time, because it's debate of the experts versus the communicators. And, I know Dave. I don't talk to him very often, but I know Dave. And I may be presuming something, but I'm not sure that Dave has ever called himself an expert on things. I think he is, his skill is that he's a terrific communicator. He can put complex thoughts into words in the way that people can understand, And Murry is sort of the old school, where you gather up all of your competencies, all of your expertise that your colleagues have provided you, and you sort of wear those on your lapel. And so I think it's my friend Jeff Dice says that we're in a post-persuasion society, and I think I think the debate is very, very important to sort of how we communicate in the future. I know that's not very coherent. I'm still my thoughts are still gathering.
Yeah. Well, one of the interesting things, I think it was mostly the first hour was sort of taken up with this debate about who is an expert, who's qualified to talk about a subject. And it was especially in relation to Daryl Cooper, who does the Martyr Made podcast. And I thought Murry was very dismissive of Cooper. He apparently hasn't listened to any of the Martyr Made podcast, but he nevertheless thought he was qualified to talk about it, ironically. Another thing, so he kept talking about how you like Daryl Cooper is not a real historian, even though, I've listened to Cooper explain his own qualifications, and he's read quite hundreds or thousands of books, I think, which isn't necessarily alone enough to make one an expert, whatever that means. But, incidentally, I don't think that Murry is actually a scholar of Islam or Palestine, Israel, or anything like that. He's a journalist and political commentator who's gone to Israel and Gaza on Israel-sponsored trips. So I think even by his own definition, he failed the expert test.
Yeah, it was. I I thought that was such a good point that you made earlier in our text, Jenny, was that he didn't. Is that he was? I mean, he was really hard on Cooper, and yet apparently has never actually listened to his podcast. And yeah, again, I think we all got pretty sick of the gatekeeping as far as who was qualified, who was allowed to talk on things, and who wasn't during COVID, right? And when the quote unquote experts told us to strap T-shirts across our faces in order to save grandma from dying, right? So I thought those days were behind us, but clearly they aren't. And that's pretty much from what I could tell. I've watched about 10 clips from it. That from what I could tell, that was Murray's entire argument, and it's the only one that I keep seeing people share. Oh, you haven't been to Israel, you can't talk about this. Like, that's the one that the Israelis or that the Zionists really, really seem to like for some reason, which is just bizarre because pretty much everyone in the U.S. that pontificates on this topic has never been to Israel or Gaza, right?
And as you pointed out, these trips are very, very highly, organized. They're carefully choreographed, and not just the ones to Israel. I mean, I'm greatly in favor of traveling. I lived overseas for the 90s, and I've been to a lot of countries, and I think it definitely helps your perspective to travel. Nevertheless, on sponsored travel, and I've been on a few sponsored congressional delegation trips, you have to understand that you're seeing what your host wants you to see, and you have to take that on board. Yeah. So I don't think that he's wrong necessarily. However, he's using these things as a bludgeon to attack someone like Dave Smith. And where you rightly point out, he himself, I mean, what is expertise? I'm a believer in expertise. I believe there are such things as historians who spend their lives studying history. And I think it's very important to have experts. But as you both point out very correctly, the experts, quote unquote, have failed us. They failed us over and over again. And Murray himself is an example because he's from the neoconservative. He wrote a book on neoconservatism. He's from those foreign policy experts, the neocons. And those experts, they all have degrees from, elite universities. They all have tons of experience in the Beltway and elsewhere in foreign policy. But they have failed us completely because they're ideologues. They may be experts on paper, but they're ideologues, and they push a particular perspective that has proven itself to be incorrect and counterproductive over decades. So who's the expert? Dave Smith, who may not have degrees in history. He may not have been, on staff in Congress. He may not have, done any of these things, but he's able to communicate ideas counter to the neoconservative ideas that resonate with average people, and it's an interesting debate, I have to say.
Yeah. Good.
Oh, I actually forgot my question. It had to do something with that. No. Those were all really interesting thoughts. The problem is I'm listening to, I'm too interested in what you have to say. Why do you think people like Douglas Murray? I mean, to me, it's so obvious that the neocons have got it wrong. And horribly wrong and been very destructive to our society, not to mention many other societies. But I have a couple neocon friends, and they are so certain, they are dead certain that they are right, that the problem is we haven't had enough of the neocon philosophy implemented. How do you think people look at the world and actually think that at this point?
Well, I mean, that's always the case. It goes back to Vietnam, at least. If you had only stayed there a few more years, if we'd only stayed 22 years in Afghanistan, it would be a paradise of rainbow flags and women's rights. We were so close. If it wasn't for you meddling kids, we would have done it. And that's what they always say, because everything they say. I mean, and we've talked about this on the Liberty Report over this past week. We remember when Netanyahu went to Congress in 2002. He was there many times, and he said, I can't quote him, but he said, "I assure you, if we overthrow the Iraqi government, there will be peace in the Middle East finally." And so the neocons were pushing that, and we did it, and we all know what happened. So they have this false sense of, I mean, they have no reverse gear, they have no brakes, they just keep moving ahead. And it's the same thing now. I mean, and you hear the same neocon arguments. You see Tom Cotton, the senator from Arkansas, who literally, gave a Richard Pearl talking point on Iran. Everyone's saying it's going to be so hard. We could go in there and just drop some bombs. It's not going to be a forever war. It's going to be a cakewalk, as we heard from Iraq. And they just keep doing it, and somehow it works. They're relentless.
Yeah, so something that and hopefully I can articulate this correctly. You know how some things make sense in your head, and then when you say them out loud, everyone's like, so something that I find very interesting with conservatives, right, is when it comes to, like, say, public education failing, right? They always say more money is not the answer. They recognize that at a certain point, when the funding, when they're well funded and the schools are still failing, that it's not about money, right? And yet, when it comes to applying that same principle to, I don't know, war, national defense, that goes straight out the window. And the only thing keeping us back is we didn't spend enough money. We haven't bought enough bombs. Apparently, we haven't invaded enough countries, right? We'll just be safe if we just, bomb the Yemeni, if we just bomb the Houthis into submission, if we can just bomb Iran into submission. And, and again, even if we did all of that, eventually what will happen, of course, we know then the Saudis will be an issue. Then the Qataris will be an issue. The Emirates will be an issue. Yeah. It's never enough because, again, the problem isn't, it's actually not the Middle East. We're the problem, right?
There's a conflict of interest because in Washington, D.C., the same people who benefit from war have the power and the authority to create the wars. And, I lived there for a long time. I lived there for 14 years, I suppose. And the lifestyle, the standard of living is extremely high. Things are very expensive. Things are very nice. I guess recently D.C. has gotten worse. I go back every couple of times a year, and it seems to have gotten worse. But nevertheless, Fairfax County and Loudoun County, these are the richest counties in the country. People live extraordinarily well. They don't live well because they make a lot of great, widgets, and they don't assemble iPhones or whatever. They live well because they take other people's money through promotion and propagation of war propaganda and war, and it pays very, very well. And we hear President Trump a couple of months ago or a month ago saying, I want to cut the defense budget in half, and we were yes. Yeah. And then Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, said just this past week, we're going to have our first $1 trillion budget for the military. So which is kind of hilarious because we've already had $1 trillion defense budgets when you add in all of the of the extras and the supplementals that get tacked on. Everyone's freaking out. I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is like the 5th year. Except for this will be the first time that the actual DoD budget without all of those supplementals will be $1 trillion, which is just really, really asinine if you think about it. And what do we get for it? Sorry to interrupt, but our weapons suck.
Yeah.
we lost in Ukraine. The Russians were able to defeat the HIMARS and all of this business very quickly, very easily.
Yep.
The whole way that the weapons are procured only guarantees tons of profits for those who manufacture them.
Right.
It doesn't guarantee great weapons. The F-35 is a terrible airplane.
Yeah, it's something like 60% of F-35s are not combat ready at any given time. Like they just are grounded, cannot, And what was it? I think I saw something about our ships, our naval ships. 80% of those are not combat ready or I guess deployment ready at any given time. Only 1 in 5 is really ready to deploy, which is just, again, $1 trillion budget. And this is what we have to show.
And we're not facing peer adversaries,
Right. Yeah.
Hardly.
And now you got the Houthis picking off those N9 Reaper drones. Yeah. I think they're up to 22 now that they are literally picking off with their homemade rockets. This is a $40 million drone, and it's again, what the hell is going on? Yeah.
Are there, based on your time in politics, do you have ideas for any possible practical solutions to this problem, the sort of conflicts of interest that you discussed?
Well, excuse me, I'm sorry. One of the things that we did when we were on the Hill, and it was easier under W. Bush than it was under Obama, was that we created a broad coalition of members that are progressive left and the conservative right and libertarians. And Dr. Paul, for example, we work very closely with Dennis Kucinich, who's on the board of our institute now, to gather them, to get these groups together and to oppose things like, like what's happening in Yemen, to do resolutions on the floor. And you're not seeing very much of that now, unfortunately. And that's key. That's key. I mean, you've seen some things. I think Thomas Massey has probably partnered with some progressives, but the progressives have sort of lost their way.
Yeah. There's no anti-war.
No, they're both. I mean, when it comes to foreign policy, they're not that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you did you have thoughts on Dave Smith's performance? Because I would say our side, quote unquote, the anti what Israel is doing in Gaza, anti-neocon policy is very divided. Some people think that he did a good job and are like, he was in a tough spot and there was a lot to contend with. And a lot of people are pretty upset and don't feel as though he adequately pushed back against some of Murray's claims, especially specific things like, he never called him out for saying that there was an organized rape stuff happening on October 7th and that kind of thing. Did you have general thoughts on that issue?
Well, I have to confess, I've only seen some clips. I can't sit still for long shows. I can't. I mean, I don't have the attention span. When I actually am going to listen to a show, I get in my car and drive because that's the only way I can concentrate. So I just can't do long form. But I've watched some clips. And again, I mean, I think Murray, this is the style, and I've how can I say this without sounding? I've spent a lot of time around people from elite UK universities. I was in the British Helsinki Human Rights Group in the 90s when I lived in Hungary, and that is what they do best. A lot of people like him do best, which is to intimidate you with their fancy accents and their swagger. And so that's what he was doing, and maybe it wrong-footed Dave a little. Dave is genuinely a nice guy,
Yeah.
And he's, his skill is as a communicator. I mean, I admire his skill. I wish I could communicate as well as he does. He's very comfortable communicating ideas to people. My friend Scott Horton is the same way. They're very good at communicating complicated ideas, like as I said when we started, in a way people can understand. And so in a way, sort of like F. Murray, I mean, seriously, because it's more important that folks out there who listen to the Dave Smiths of the world hear Dave Smith than hear Murray in his. I mean, who reads The Spectator anyway? I mean, I haven't read it. I read it, maybe 30 years ago when I was reading National Review and The Spectator, and they actually had people who were intelligent writing for them, people who would never be allowed to write in either publication today. They had Joe Sobran writing in the National Review. Are you kidding? So that wouldn't happen. So who cares? It's sort of the dying elephants.
Yeah. That was Go ahead.
I would definitely say that Murray needed Dave Smith much more than Dave Smith needed Douglas Murray. And, I listened to a space last night and people were upset. And I understand why they're upset, because there's so many lies that these people tell over and over again. And they are really damaging, right? Especially the one about Hamas keeping artillery inside. Inside the civilian infrastructure, because of course that is what Israel uses in order to carpet bomb. Right, that's the excuse, and but at the same time, I have been in the position where people are saying this, and for whatever reason, you don't want to interrupt, and then you forget to go back, and then it is hard to counter, especially because they are operating with bullshit from start to finish. So you're just like constantly, it's like whack-a-mole trying to shoot down the bullshit 24/7. So things are going to get through. They are. And I get it. I know some of them were some pretty big things, and I know people were upset about that. But at the same time, I saw a lot of people who either said, I've seen like 4 or 5 people say, I was kind of on the fence, but Douglas Murray sounded like a really big jerk here, and so Dave maybe not being that aggressive really helped to change people's minds. And then I've seen a lot of guys who are like real America first, kind of nationalist guys, but who wanted to stay out of this because it's so rife with emotion that they have been like vehemently defending Dave Smith today. So I think that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, again, I would just say that, we are in a post-persuasion society to a degree. I mean, those of us who have made up our mind about Gaza, it will be very difficult to change opinions. The people who support it, I don't know that lack of information is enough because people are in their tribes. If I'm this, then I'm this, and I'm, by God, I'm gonna, I've got a few American flags in my profile and, and a couple of Israeli flags too. Or on the other side, and I think a lot of people like us are appalled. And it doesn't matter what country on earth was doing this. Anywhere on earth that we saw these kinds of scenes, we would be appalled and angered. So the people in the middle that can listen to someone like Dave, I think he's very persuasive. But it's difficult. We live in a difficult time, we're not interested in listening to other ideas. We're interested in our tribes. And, those of us who aren't, well, we're freaks.
Yeah.
Let's face it, we are freaks.
Let's switch over to tariffs. Do you have some thoughts on Trump's tariff calamity that's been going on? Because I know you guys have some pretty strong feelings about free trade. Libertarians always do.
Well, I'm not a libertarian. But,
oh, you're not?
No, I'm a nothingtarian.
Okay.
But yeah.
So, well, before you say that, how would you describe your politics then, to give a little framing?
Have you ever seen the George Carlin clip on why he doesn't vote? That's me.
No.
Look it up after. There are a couple of bad words in it, but it's worth watching. I don't take part in politics because I don't think politics is helpful at all. That doesn't mean
but that's not always. But I assume that's not always been your philosophy, right?
No, I stopped voting, I think, in 2002.
Okay.
So it's been a while since I voted. Yeah. And I've sort of hoped people would win. I wanted Trump to win. He sounded good on the campaign trail, and the first couple of weeks were quite good, very encouraging. But he's taken a real, turn. And the tariff thing is there are a couple of things about the tariff thing that are important. I think first of all is the lack of consistency. I mean, you cannot run a country. You cannot run an economy. You cannot function. I mean, companies, businesses in other nations need to understand you as a reliable partner. It can't be like, today it's 20. Yeah. Oh, yeah, well, you pissed me off. It's 30. Oh, yeah, you made fun of my wife. It's 40. I feel like I've taken some crazy pills on this. But the tariffs can be effective tools if they are used. I mean, we used tariffs in the early part of this country, and we used it to fund the government. But the government was very, very small, and it didn't do very many things. And so you could easily fund it. There's no way we can fund the government of our size that does all the things it does with tariffs. And I don't even think the philosophy that Trump is employing to deploy these tariffs are to fund the government. It's to make those other guys pay. They're ripping us off. They're not buying enough of our stuff. And so we're going to put tariffs on. Tariffs are a tax, and the tax of tariffs, they hurt the working class poor. They hurt the middle class more than the rich. If there's a 20% tariff on a car or a 30% tariff on a car, a rich person's going to go, oh, that's kind of a bummer, but I'll get the Jaguar anyway. I wanted it. It's not a big deal. But if your bread or your eggs or your gas is 30, not your gas. I mean, well, that could affect it actually. Is 30% more, or if you got to get, I got to get a car. Oh man, what am I going to do? And it's an extra $5,000 on it. Are you kidding? It affects people in the middle classes more. It's a tax, and that's why it's unconstitutional. The president doesn't have the authority. Article 1, Section 8 gives that authority to Congress, and Congress is just, as usual, they're sleepwalking through the whole thing. They don't care. They just don't care. They want to throw dirt. They want to throw feces at each other. They want to make fun of each other. It really is idiocracy when you look at Congress. There are very few adults. There are very few adults in the room.
I tweeted the other day that living in this country makes me feel like the child of divorced parents who hate each other more than they love me, and they'll just do anything to cause each other pain. It's just like, and it's all with our tax money. It's so infuriating. Like all they do is destructive stuff.
The one thing that Congress is in place to do, well, the main thing is to pass appropriations bills, is to fund government. That is their role. That is the one thing they do not do. and they haven't done it for years. It's called regular order. I think there are 8 appropriations bills.
Wait, I thought their role was to police anti-Semitic speech.
Oh, that's right.
Are you sure?
Deport. Yeah, that's right. That's right. But,
Based on the number of bills that have passed.
No, Jenin, we have a new envoy.
We have a new czar of...
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. They get into mischief, idle hands, the devil's playground, and that's what it is.
Yeah.
When we were there, I mean, it sounded like some kind of dinosaur, but there were like 12, I don't know how many appropriations bills, and that's what you spent your year doing. You had to fund government for the next year. Now there were other things you named, post office and this and that and the other, of course, but the essential role, and that's why, I mean, an individual member of Congress, of the House, under regular order has a large amount of authority, because I don't want to bore you, but when there's an appropriations bill on the floor, under regular order, it was called an open rule, which that any member could go down to the floor, put in an amendment, as long as it was germane, i.e. it had to do with funding, that member had 5 minutes to make the case for the amendment, and other members in support or in opposition could claim their 5 minutes or their 2 minutes or whatever the rule said. So each member could go down, and we did it all the time. Dr. Paul would we'd organize it with Dennis Kucinich or Walter Jones or a few of the other members would organize, and they would go down, and they would really be able to talk about the bill and talk about what was happening. Well, you get rid of all that, and they have nothing to do but, call each other names and, deport those of us who were a little bit skeptical about slaughter and genocide. It's just awful. I hate seeing it.
Yeah.
It is very frustrating. And I saw earlier where the White House apparently called China and asked them to have Xi call Trump. So, which is pretty much as clear of a sign as anything, I think, that things are not going well or the way that they had hoped that they would go, because I guess the whole idea was that Trump was going to isolate China from the rest of the world, right? By putting on the 90-day pause. And I don't know why they thought that this would work, because China hasn't done anything for these other countries. China has actually been pretty stable, right? And China hasn't done anything for these other countries to want to rally against them. I mean, I have known people like Donald Trump before that like to pit people against each other, and that's really his entire MO. That's his style. That's how he likes to do business and whatnot. And I'm sure in some ways, especially when he was the head of his own company, that worked well for him. But the world isn't even the same as it was when he left office in 2020. It's an extremely different world. The power dynamics have changed dramatically, and so now it does seem to be that he actually doesn't have a backup plan for what if this doesn't work, and it's the biggest gamble that he could have possibly made. And I'm extremely concerned now when it's looking like, I don't know, maybe there was just no one in the room that had the foresight to say, what's plan B?
That's a good point. No one in the room, because it reminds me of the Yemen strike, against these tribesmen. I mean, we spend $200 billion a year on intelligence, and nobody had the intelligence to call up and say, hey, that's not. They're not out in the middle of the desert planning an attack, you morons. You're killing a bunch of innocent civilians. There's just no plan B. With these people, and that's it. I mean, it's a huge problem. But with China, I mean, you're right. The U.S. is not the juggernaut that it was even 10 years ago. So when the sanctions first came in, we don't sell a lot to China because we don't really make anything here. We just, we just text and do stuff like that. We don't do very much. So when but one thing we do sell them is a lot of soybeans. And so when Trump did this, China's like, okay, hey Brazil, how you doing? You guys, can you sell us some soybeans? They're like, yeah, no problem. And that's what happens. I mean, there's a thing called BRICS.
Right.
You would have thought someone in the White House would have looked it up. But then again, you have the circular thinking. Oh, you can imagine what it must have sounded like. All this BRICS thing is just BS. They can't do a thing without us. We're the indispensable nation. And then as soon as they announce these, China will just go elsewhere. The world has changed a lot. Right. As you very well point out, Mel, it's changed a lot. And we just can't push people around. Ironically, because we have pushed people around so much, they've sort of developed new sinews. Their neurons have refused and they've gone somewhere else. and it's a different world now. So we've destroyed the dollar by prohibiting the use of the dollar, and now we're all pissed off because no one wants to use the dollar anymore.
Yeah.
Do you have, I know some people don't like to make predictions, so feel free to pass, but do you have any thoughts on where this is going?
I think it hinges on whether there's going to be a war with Iran. I mean, I think a war with Iran, unless I am so completely wrong, and I pride myself on not being wrong, unless I'm so completely wrong, it will change everything. I think it will throw the economy into a depression. It'll be the end of Trump's presidency. It could be the end of the U.S. as such.
Wow.
Can we flatten the country? Yes, but can you imagine a preemptive nuclear strike on Iran? I mean, what that would do to the U.S. standing in the world. I mean, it would make Netanyahu look like a humanitarian.
Have you seen these reports of nuclear detection? I guess people were detecting nuclear waste in Syria, and they were basically alleging that the Israelis, this just came out like 2 days ago, that the Israelis had used a tactical nuke in Syria, and there's been a media blackout on it. And I didn't know if you had seen anything. I just saw it, and it was an actual report that someone did on the radiation levels or whatever they were testing for. But it was pretty concerning, I thought. And then I always get really nervous when it seems like there's just a total silence from everyone, right? Usually something like that you would see, of course, that all of the Zionists would be, oh, they're accusing Israel of using nukes, yada, yada, yada. That's like, freaking bait in the water for carp, right? They're all over it. And to use that to discredit us, and yet just silence, nothing. I mean, in the tweet and the report that it included had I don't know, maybe 200,000 views. So I know they had seen it, but
there were a couple of times that weapons were used that people speculated might have been more than just massive conventional bombs. And it wouldn't be surprising. And my guess is if that's what happened, it was partly to send a message to Iran. But look, we're not afraid to use these things. I've not seen that report. But it's very concerning. But I mean, that's Israel right now. It's backed against the wall. It's hated by literally every other country. The Pew organization put out a poll this week saying that 53% of Americans do not support Israel. And that's something. Now, we're not all extremists. You can't say, oh, you're extremists, because we're the majority.
Yeah.
And I never thought I would say that. I was never against Israel. I didn't really give a damn. I just didn't want to do foreign aid for anyone. But, for now, after 2 years of seeing kids' heads blown off, I'm a little bit angry about Israel, and I think a lot of Americans are as well. So, perceptions are changing. Israel's in a corner. It knows that it doesn't have a lot of time. Internally, Israel is an absolute mess. I mean, it's just I'm not an expert on internal Israeli politics, but even just from a distance, Netanyahu's corruption, the Cartergate, all of these things that he's done, the people in his cabinet hating each other, it's just a mess. So I think in desperation, they may go out with a bang.
I saw earlier today that it was like 2 days ago, they had something like a couple hundred Air Force veterans who had deployed, that they wrote this long letter, right? Yeah. Well, did you see this morning they fired all of the officers who had signed that letter?
The letter was the letter was saying against war with Iran.
Yep. The letter was saying against any, that you need to stop the war in Gaza. It needs a permanent ceasefire. You need a truce. Yeah. We don't want to go back. And of course they were arguing it from this: we want our hostages back. We need an end to the war for us. Of course, it was never to stop the suffering of the people of Gaza. But regardless, it was an anti-war peace, and it was signed. It was several hundred officers, but I think something like 950 total Air Force veterans of some sort, all of whom had been deployed to Gaza. So and then just this morning, I think it was that one guy that works for Axios,
Barak Ravi.
Yeah. He posted on it, so that they had fired all of the officers.
I mean, I think people are also pretty put off. I guess Douglas Murray would call me anti-Semitic for saying this, but like the amount of control that Israel has over our government with these anti-Semitism speech rules and executive orders that are coming down, people being deported for advocating for Palestinian human rights. Now we have a special envoy who's Israeli to police our anti-Semitic speech. This is crazy. I can't, even if I knew nothing about this conflict and had no Palestinian background, I think I would look at this and think like, what? Why is this country having so much control over us and shredding our constitution?
And Americans are thinking that. That's why you're seeing these numbers. I mean, the Pew numbers were, the Gallup, I think last month had the same kinds of numbers. They're seeing this, and so if Trump and the hardcore pro-Israel people around him think they're doing Israel a favor by policing our thoughts, it's having the opposite effect. You look at the Pew poll. If you look at the younger, the 18 to 40, whatever, that even among Republicans, that skews very, very heavily against Israel. So the younger generation is not buying the BS. The old boomers, well, they have it in their DNA, but the younger generation is not buying this, and so it's going to have the opposite effect. It's having the opposite effect. We're seeing it. People are sick of it. They're sick of seeing AIPAC bragging, 98% of the people we support get elected. They're saying, well, why is that? It doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Normal Americans can't say that 98% of the people that they support get elected, which one of us has won 98% of the elections that we wanted to? None of us, obviously. No one should have that much impact.
Imagine the Chinese bragging that they 98% of the time our Chinese-backed candidate wins. We would have a national flip out.
Oh yeah. Any country, if Ireland did that, it would be people would be ticked. I know. Yeah.
Do you have a read of why Trump sort of changed course, early on in his second term, brokered the ceasefire deal very rapidly, seemed to be wanting to end the war in Gaza and, came in as the free speech president, and then within a few weeks just totally changed course. Do you think that was sort of always the plan and some of us like me were just fooled, or was he told he had to do certain things like during those weeks?
I mean, it's hard to know. I mean, maybe he reverted to form because he was like this the first time. And for all of his bluster about John Bolton, he's surrounded by like 5 John Boltons.
Yeah.
They don't have the goofy mustache, but they're the same guy, with the same worldview. Just like this whole like Signalgate thing, Goldberg. Oh my gosh, he's a Trump hater. He agrees with them completely on this policy.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no space between them. So as to whether he changed or whether we were fooled, I was hoping for the best. I always hope for the best. And even though I don't take part, we tried to be very positive. And if he does something positive, I will say something. We will say something positive that he's done. And it's just getting a little harder to look for those things and find them these days.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, it's the Signalgate thing. It's very bizarre to me that Mike Waltz wasn't fired because Goldberg is a notorious Trump hater. He pushed Russiagate. If I were Trump and I had found out that you had made contact with him on an encrypted chat, right? And then you went so far as to invite him to the conversation, which I have to assume he was one of the first people invited into that group chat, and that's why all the other people didn't see him join, right? Because then, if not, why would you not say, why the hell is this dude in
Jeffrey
here?
Goldberg.
Yeah. And I just, assume I don't always check to see everyone that's in the group. I get added and, we just roll from there, and somebody doesn't speak, then they are a ghost to me. So I have to assume that he was one of the first people that was added to the chat. And it's astounding to me that Trump did not fire him. It's like he hasn't learned any freaking lessons, I say this as someone who was ticked when I found out, because like you said, I mean, Mike Waltz is just kind of a better looking John Bolton, a little bit more beefed up John Bolton, but I mean, their philosophy, their approach to foreign policy is identical. And, so he never should have been there to begin with. And he had the perfect excuse to get rid of him. And yet, what did we see? Oh, no. The same goes. I was thinking about him the other day. Trump saying, "Well, I actually believe the official story on Butler. I believe that it really was that this kid just walked through town with his AR-15 and was able to climb up on there, and it was a whoopsie daisies by the Secret Service." And I'm like, are you just getting old?
I thought it was the Iranians who did it.
Right? No, they were the ones. They were responsible, I think, for the golf course.
Oh, okay, that's right. That's what I keep
Right.
forgetting. Yeah, I mean, is it evil or stupid, Waltz? Or both? I don't know. I mean, Bolton Bolton is evil, but he's much smarter than Mike Waltz. Mike Waltz is dumb.
Very
He's
true.
dumb as dirt, and Bolton is smart and evil. But it would have been a good chance. But again, the main point is that yes, Goldberg hates Trump, but they have the same views on the Middle East. Goldberg, a former prison guard for the IDF, who took part in torture of Palestinians. He's one of us guys. So, I mean, it can't be an accident that Waltz let him in, And what I think actually what shocked me the most is when Waltz out and out lied that he didn't get fired for that, because he said, "I did not know the man." The cock crows 3 times. "I did not know the man." And it turns out, and Goldberg said, we're buds. We hang out, I mean, it's, that's the part that's even weirder,
Oh yeah. It just got sucked into my phone. He just got sucked into my.
Oh my
You
God.
guys, everybody out there knows what I'm talking about. I'm like watching this, like that has literally never happened, not one time.
Maybe it works on the boomer cons who have never used Signal group chats.
Yeah, these dirty pictures got sucked into my computer.
I know, right? Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's crazy.
Yeah. If I had been him, I would have set my phone off and pretended like it had been hacked, Yeah, I mean, that would have been actually maybe a little believable, And if he had been thinking, he could have just blamed it on the Iranians.
Exactly. Perfect.
Yeah, if it had been John Bolton, that's exactly what he would have done.
No question.
And so, and I think that's, and now one more thing real quick before we go. Russia. I don't know if you saw Trump's post earlier today. He said, let me read this comment because it was pretty incredible to me, and I have it right here. I had to post on it because I was kind of shocked. It says, Russia has to get moving. Too many people are dying, thousands a week, in a terrible and senseless war, a war that should have never happened. It wouldn't have happened if I were president. I know, right? And I'm like, okay, well, you are president now. So, and I was thinking, well, no, actually, Russia doesn't have to do anything because Russia is winning their war. So they can actually do whatever they please. And if you want this war to end, you have to push Ukraine to the table, and you have to be realistic with them about their chances of turning this around, which are sitting at 0.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate. I don't wish anything bad upon the Ukrainian people, and I do feel sorry for them for all of their sacrifice is going to probably end up being in vain. But at the same time, it's just asinine that this is still going on. Part of the reason I voted for Trump was I thought at least, if nothing else, he will end the bloodshed in Ukraine.
See, I take a little bit different of a view. I mean, I think Trump's election was the greatest opportunity to end the war by Trump just simply saying, this was Biden's war. I didn't start it. It's not my war. It's not in our interest. We're going to pull out, that's it. We're done.
Yeah.
And that would have been very easy, just like he was dying to get out of Afghanistan, and he hired my friend Doug McGregor. You got to get us out of Afghanistan. And Doug came in with the plan, and it was thwarted by his national security advisor. I mean, the easiest way to end the Ukraine war is to leave. But what it shows me, this tweet, and I hadn't read it yet, it shows me how divorced from reality they remain in the White House. Because this isn't like it's not like your kids are over there fighting. Come on, you guys, knock it off. I mean, Russia told us why they went to war. They were telling us, at least from the 2007 Munich Security Conference, Putin made it very clear why Russia was getting more and more irked about NATO expansion, putting weapons on our border, and everyone just said, "Oh, that's Putin. He's whatever." They ignored it, and there was finally the ultimatum, just a couple of months before Russia attacked, saying we need to have a new security architecture for Europe. This is not working. You can't take over Ukraine. You've surrounded us with bases. You can't now take over Ukraine and have NATO weapons on our border. And Trump even seemed to understand that. Remember when he first took office, he said, yeah, I get it. We'd be ticked off if there were weapons on our border. But he doesn't understand that this isn't just two guys who can't seem to get along. This is a war, for Russia's perspective. It's an existential war. And I think it is an existential war because the neocons have been very open about it. They want to break Russia up into parts and take it over and take the resources. It's, as the left would say, it's an imperialist war, and in a way they're right about that. So you have to understand a conflict before you can end it. The best way to end it is not to bring them to the table or do anything like that. It's just to simply say, okay, we're out. And that is happening by de facto, by the way, because the president's drawdown authority, the weapons that Biden sent at the very end of his authority are now running out, and there aren't any weapons. So if they come back to Congress and ask for more money for weapons, that will be actually another sort of red line in a way. I mean, we'll see what they're made of if they come and ask to do that. I mean, I think that would be very harmful to Trump's presidency if he were to do that.
I was thinking about it earlier, thinking about Iran and about, I saw where someone said that, I forget who it was. I think it was maybe Scott Ritter who said that Iran and Russia had a de facto alliance, a defense alliance. So I was thinking maybe the reason they haven't drawn it down is because they want to keep Russia occupied in case they attack Iran. So Russia can't come in and defend Iran. Other than that, I simply can't think of any reason why they have continued to prolong this catastrophe.
Yeah, well, they signed an agreement, an agreement between the two countries, but it's not a mutual defense treaty.
Okay.
There are components of it, and actually Larry Johnson did a good job in describing some aspects of it. That some of the language referring to the UN, it sort of gives it a flavor of mutual defense, but it's not explicitly so. And I personally don't think Russia would get involved if the U.S. attacked Iran. Not overtly, but there are plenty of things they could do covertly. They could give us a taste of our own medicine. This is what we've been doing to Russia for 3 years now. That's the only thing that came out of this New York Times article. It shows that this whole thing has been planned from Wiesbaden with the U.S. military planners. I mean, this is an American war against Russia using the blood of Ukrainians.
So awful, so shameful. Yeah.
Before we go, I did have one question for you. I didn't get to ask when you brought it up. When you said we live in a post-persuasion world at this point, do you see that as? I mean, I infer from you saying it's now a post-persuasion world that this is true, but do you see that as really different from how people used to be? Were they more persuadable? And what do you attribute the change to? Social media or more divisive politics?
Well, I think also, yes, I do think we're in that world, and I think maybe it's an overstatement, maybe it's much more difficult, but there's been a crisis of experts. The crisis, it goes back to how we started with this Murry fellow. I mean, there's a crisis in our confidence in experts now. As the media is a big part of it. There was confidence in the mainstream media, and they were more serious about journalism. It's just a fact. In the past. And so the people who are supposed to inform us, the media, during COVID, it would be the medical establishment, the scientific establishment, they've all proven themselves to be prostitutes. And so I think we have just all turned off and said, I'm not going to listen to any of them. I used to pore over long articles, written in serious journals, and now I just think they're all full of crap. So, I mean, I think that's for better or worse. We now talk to each other. We don't talk through articles, through comments. With some exceptions, I think.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting insight. It seems to me that a lot of what happened was the establishment media kind of ended up just being arms of the Democrat and Republican Party, and it was and that's a large part of the problem. And then during COVID, that became so obvious when they weren't doing real journalism, weren't doing real research, and people sort of saw in real time just how much they were being hoodwinked, I guess, into believing that these sources were, relying on these sources was the right thing to do.
Well, yeah, well, it became you couldn't question anything, even no matter how dumb everything got. You know, you had. I think COVID was just so extreme, right? We had the plexiglass thing coming down, protecting the cashier, right? And but then it's open on both sides.
Yeah. And
You
the
had
cloth masks. I was like, I might not know a lot, and I don't have a degree in epidemiology, but like, I'm pretty sure putting a piece of cloth over your face isn't gonna save your life.
You had the tape on the grocery store floor. You know, the grocery store was just so rife with these terrible examples of things, and I understand what they were kind of trying to get at, but at the same time, it was just so dumb. And I also think it's because you had regular people, like some of them, really enforcing all this really stupid stuff, and so they became like the mouthpieces of the expert class, you know, and so unfortunately, for the expert class, maybe. They're now associated with the lady who yelled at me because I lifted up the bag on the ATM or on the debit card thing so I could push the button because it wasn't working, you know?
Oh my God.
Yeah. And
it shows how fragile our society is, you know. I mean, just barely beneath the surface are a bunch of people who hate our guts and would happily send us to the gulag, you know. And that's, I think that's the most important reminder. You wonder, you know, it's kind of cliche, but how could Germans sit by and watch the boxcars run? Well, we have that same element in our society. And COVID was where we saw it laid bare in its raw.
And now with a lot of the deportations and stuff, you know, I'm not like an open borders person. I don't actually have like extremely strong feelings on immigration. Obviously, like everyone else, I don't think we should let a lot of criminals into the country, but I think immigrants do good things for our society. I also understand like not wanting to completely overwhelm ourselves with immigrants, but whatever, that's besides the point. But so many people gloating about, you know, well, I don't like this person's views, so they should, you know, they're a guest in my country, get them out, you know, as the, like, how does, you know, I saw Megyn Kelly talking about Mahmoud Khalil, and well, he, you know, he was arguing that we should divest from Israel, or Colombia should divest from Israel, so get them out of the country. I mean, what kind of an attitude is this to have, that someone doesn't share your views on something, so we should ruin their life?
Yeah, wait till the Dems get back in control and say something about a trans person.
Exactly.
You know, be careful what you do. I mean, there's a reason why, I mean, it's so infuriating. There's a reason why the Bill of Rights doesn't just pertain to American citizens. It's for everyone. The whole point of it was, this is the natural state of man. And this is what we aspire to as the United States. We are setting an example. We're recognizing it in the natural state of man. You have these rights. And you've got all these knuckleheads saying, well, he's a guest in our country. How dare he express views? Well, that's the reason he came. You know?
Exactly. Right.
We sell ourselves as the country. We're so great. You can say what you want. Damn it, get out of here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I keep on making this point that the First Amendment is a restraint on government. It doesn't talk about the speaker's status. It says, no, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. If a statute allows for someone's deportation because of their speech, the statute is clearly unconstitutional. It's actually not very complicated.
Right.
And then like, you can... this idea that, well, my views, well, who gets to decide? Does it mean whoever the executive is? So in 4 years, we could have a president saying that it's his policy to, you know, promote trans rights across the world. And if you think trans women shouldn't be in women's sports, you're a threat to that, so we can deport you. So no one can have any stability. Yeah, what Mahmoud Khalil has a kid on the way. Is his kid supposed to be raised like thinking his parent can be kicked out of the country at any minute? Like, what kind of a society are you advocating for? It's crazy.
It's a bigger thing than people realize. It really is.
Yeah.
It's gross. And, you know, for me, I try to keep it as simple as possible. You either believe that you were born with these rights, that God gave them to you upon your creation, or you believe that the government gave them to you. You have to pick, okay? It's very, very simple. And, you know, any other time, these fools would be talking, these are my God-given rights, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah,
you know, until it comes to this defending this foreign, you know, yeah, exactly. Israel. Yeah. Then it's all about, you know, that all goes out the window, and you know, Uncle Sam is the one who says what you can and can't say. Damn it.
Oh,
it's
they haven't thought through how scary the implications of this are. And actually, Khalil has a hearing today. I don't know how. I've been following this very, very closely because I think the implications of this case really can't be understated. So he has an immigration court hearing today, and the government was ordered to produce their evidence by Wednesday. And it was like 2 paragraphs saying he's participated in anti-Semitic protests, and this poses a threat to our national security. That's literally all they can come up with. I mean, if the judge greenlights this deportation, that is very, very bad for America. luckily, he still has a habeas petition pending in federal court. It's very complicated procedurally, so he still has recourse through that. But it would be nice if the immigration judge was like, no, you can't deport people for their speech.
Yeah.
Because if she says you can, and then it has to be contested in federal court, it's going to make things a little bit more complicated. But yeah, hopefully that. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah,
I was just going to say that this is where I very much hope that our Jewish friends who are very, very active in these protests can save us in a way, because I'm sure they will, but they need to stand up and say, hey, hang on a minute, you can't deport me for being anti-Semitic,
Yeah.
I'm a Jewish student.
Once we also walk down the path of speech and ideas are a national security threat, then that's going to be applied in the citizen context too. Sure, maybe they're not going to deport us, but they're going to be able to find ways to use the law to say that our thoughts, our ideas, our speech is posing a national security risk. So we cannot allow this. And I really hope the judges are wise enough to see it. I've been in front of enough judges. It makes me nervous. They're not all the sharpest tools in the shed.
Amen.
Jenin, is it in Louisiana or?
Yeah, Louisiana. The immigration case is in Jenin, Louisiana, and then the habeas case is in New Jersey. So it's like two separate paths. There's the immigration path and then the habeas path. So his lawyers are arguing that, like, even if you could, even if from an immigration perspective, this is okay, it's not okay from a constitutional perspective. It's weird. So even if he loses today, it's not like the end, but it would be bad. It's like a bad sign. It's not good.
Yeah.
So we'll find out.
Do you know anything about the judge?
No. I mean, she
was appointed by or anything?
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of these judges are actually like, I believe, I don't know that much about immigration court. I've never practiced in it, but I'm pretty sure that they're not independent. They're part of ICE. So,
Okay. Yeah.
It's an administrative procedure. I mean, these are all issues in administrative law and administrative proceedings. Right? Yeah. But at least that's why, at least it's good that he has a path through federal court, the Article 3 court. Yeah. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Daniel.
Before you go, any final thoughts? And also, where can people find you?
Well, they can go to ronpaulinstitute.org to see what we do. We publish articles every day I very carefully select what I want to publish, because we don't sort of blanket publish tons of things. If you have time to read one or two articles, these are the ones I think you should read that day. Mm-hmm. We have conferences. We just had one down here in Lake Jackson, Texas. Our next one will be on October 16th in Dulles, Virginia. We always have great speakers. We've had Max Blumenthal. We've had Julian Assange. We've had RFK. That's a whole different topic. But we always have great and provocative speakers, and we get together a lot of great people from broad spectrum of political views. So
nice.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom. We really appreciate it.
Yep, and we'll see you
soon.
Great talking to you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. You too.